In the summer of 1947, a 16-year-old boy walked into a place he did not belong. Clean tile floors, cool air, the smell of new rubber and machine oil. Three men in pressed shirts and polished boots stood beside a row of green tractors, talking to a salesman. Everything in that room was in order. Clean, controlled. Then he stepped inside. Barefoot, no shirt. A pair of worn cotton pants cut off at the knees because the legs had torn too many times to mend. Sunburned skin, thin frame, dirt pressed into every crease of his hands. He stopped just inside the doorway. No one spoke at first. They just looked. Behind the counter, Frank Dalton looked up. His eyes moved slowly, from the bare feet, to the cut pants, to the boy's chest, and finally to his face. 5 seconds passed. Then, Frank laughed. Not a quiet laugh. A full, open laugh that cut through the room and pulled every eye toward the doorway. The three men turned. The salesman turned. Now everyone was looking at him. "Son," Frank said, still smiling, "I think you're in the wrong place." He pointed toward the road outside. "Feed stores down the street. We sell tractors here." One of the men chuckled. The others stayed quiet, but they didn't look away. The boy didn't leave. He took a step forward. "I know what you sell," he said. "I want to buy something." Frank's smile didn't disappear. It changed, sharpened. "Buy," he repeated. "With what?" The boy reached into his pocket, pulled out a wad of crumpled bills. Ones, fives, a single 10, $60. He held it out. Said nothing. Frank didn't take it. He looked at the money, then at the boy, then back at the men in the room. His voice got louder. "Listen to this," he said. "This kid wants to buy a tractor. With $60. A laugh came from the side, then another. Not loud, but enough. "Son," Frank said, leaning forward slightly, "the cheapest thing in here is $400. He tapped the counter. "You've got 60. You couldn't buy the seat off a tractor with that." The boy didn't pull his hand back. "I don't need a tractor," he said. "I need a plow. Or a disc. Something with steel. Something I can pull with a mule." Frank stopped smiling for a moment. "You serious?" "I've been working since I was 10 years old to save this," the boy said. "I walked 15 miles to get here." Frank leaned back, then forward again, like he was deciding how much time this was worth. "I'll give you some free advice," he said. His voice dropped, but the whole room could still hear it. "Go home. Stay up in your hills. Work your little garden patch with a hoe, like your daddy and his daddy. People like you don't buy equipment. People like you don't farm for real." One of the men looked away. The others didn't. "That's not an insult," Frank added. "That's just the truth. Farming takes money, land, equipment. And you," he glanced down at the boy's feet. "You've got $60 and no shoes. That's not a farmer. That's a charity case." The room went quiet. No more laughter. No one spoke. The boy stood there, barefoot on clean tile, money still in his hand. No one took it. 1 second, 2, 3. Then he lowered his hand, put the money back into his pocket, lifted his eyes, looked straight at Frank Dalton. "I'll be back." Not loud, not angry, just a statement. Then he turned, and walked out. Outside, the sun hit the road hard. Gravel burned under his feet. He started walking. Not fast. Not slow. 15 miles back home. Sharp stones cut into his skin. But he didn't stop. He had walked worse roads his whole life. But this time, something was different. Not the pain. Not the distance. Something deeper. Something hotter. Sitting in his chest. Not fading. He didn't look back, didn't think about the laughter. He just kept walking. And for the first time in his life, he stopped waiting for permission. He decided to build something on his own. That boy's name was Caleb Turner. And that day wasn't the day he failed. It was the day he started. Caleb didn't go back to the house right away. He left the road before it turned toward the hollow and climbed the narrow footpath that cut along the ridge above their cabin. It was the same path his father had dragged him across for years. Up and down, over rock, through brush, across ground no one else bothered to look at twice. The sun was still high, but the trees cast long shadows across the slope. Cooler there, quieter. Caleb stopped halfway up and looked out over the hills. Layer after layer of ridges folding into each other. Steep, uneven, covered in scrub timber and thin grass. The kind of land people in town called useless. His father had never used that word. See that ground? The voice came back to him like it always did. Clear, sharp, unchanged. Caleb could almost see him there, standing a few steps ahead on the trail, pointing with a calloused hand. Everyone says that's worthless, his father used to say. But look under it. Back then, Caleb hadn't understood what he was supposed to see. All he saw was slope, rock, trees too thin to cut for anything worth selling. But his father never stopped. He would walk the ridge, slow and deliberate, boot pressing into the soil, testing it without tools. Feel that, he'd say. Caleb would kneel, press his hand into the ground. Sometimes it was dry. Sometimes it held. He never knew the difference. Water runs this way. His father would continue, tracing a line across the slope with his finger. Not straight down. Cuts across. Holds here. Then drops there. He didn't explain why. He just showed. Again. And again. And again. Caleb moved further up the ridge. His bare feet found the ground without thinking, stepping around loose rock, avoiding sharp edges, following the same instincts he'd built over years of walking it. He reached a clearing near the top. Stopped. Looked down. From there, he could see their entire piece of land. If you could call it that. A narrow stretch carved into the side of a hill. A small garden patch near the cabin. A few rows of corn. Not enough. Never enough. Below that, more hillside. Steeper. Untouched. That's where it is. The words came back to him. Not from today. From years ago. His father had stood right here once, pointing to that exact slope. Under them trees, he'd said. That's black ground. Limestone under it. Holds water longer than it should. You clear it. Terrace it. Put cattle up top. Plant down the face. That ground'll feed a family. Caleb swallowed. Looked at it again. The same slope. Still covered in thin timber. Still ignored by everyone else. Then why don't you do it? He had asked back then. His father hadn't answered right away. Just stood there, looking at it. Because I ain't got the money, he said eventually, and I ain't got the patience. Then he looked down at Caleb, longer than usual. But you might be different. Caleb stood there now, alone, the words still hanging in the same place they had years ago. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the crumpled bills again, smoothed them against his palm.
$60. Everything he had. Not enough for a tractor, not enough for anything in that store, but maybe enough for something else. He looked back at the slope, really looked this time. Not the trees, not the rock, the ground beneath it. The way the hill curved, the way the lower edge flattened slightly before dropping again. The way the soil changed color near the base, subtle, but there. He stepped forward, carefully, down the slope, knelt, pressed his hand into the dirt. The top layer was dry. Of course it was. Everything was dry this time of year. But he pushed deeper, fingers breaking through the loose layer, reaching. Then, resistance. Wait, something different. He pulled his hand back, looked at it. Darker. Not by much, but enough. Caleb exhaled slowly. Not excitement. Not yet. Something closer to recognition. He stood up, looked across the ridge again, at all the ground people ignored, all the land people passed over. Then back down at the slope. He didn't need the dealership. He didn't need permission. He didn't need someone to sell him something. He needed this. Caleb folded the money and put it back in his pocket. Then he picked up a fallen branch from the ground, used it to mark a line across the slope. Rough, uneven, but clear. A place to start. The sun had started to drop behind the ridge when he turned back toward the cabin. The path felt shorter this time, not because he wasn't walking away anymore. He was walking toward something. That night, he didn't say much at supper. His father didn't ask. He didn't need to. Caleb lay awake long after the fire burned low, staring up at the dark ceiling, listening to the quiet, not thinking about the laughter, not anymore, thinking about the ground, where to cut, where to hold, where to start. And for the first time, he saw it, not as land no one wanted, but as land no one had tried hard enough to understand. Caleb Turner closed his eyes, and by morning, he wasn't going back to the store. He was going to the hill. Caleb didn't go back to the dealership. He went to work. The next morning, before the sun cleared the ridge, he was already on the slope. Same place his father had pointed to years before, same patch of ground everyone else walked past without seeing. He didn't bring much, an old axe, a borrowed crosscut saw, a length of rope, no machine, no plan drawn on paper, just a line he'd scratched into the dirt the day before. The first tree took him nearly an hour, not because it was big, because he was learning where to cut, how to angle the blade, how to read the lean before it fell. He missed the first notch, cut too shallow, the trunk shifted wrong. He had to step back, reset, start again. By the time it came down, his hands were already blistered, his shoulders burned. He didn't stop. Tree by tree, step by step, he worked across the slope, not fast, not clean, but steady. By midday, the sun was straight overhead, heat pressed down through the open space where the trees had been, no shade, no breeze. He wiped sweat from his face with the back of his arm, looked at what he'd cleared. It didn't look like much, a few stumps, a patch of exposed ground, but it was the first piece of land that was his, not owned, not yet, but claimed. He kept going. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. He worked for other men when he had to, fence building, hauling, cutting tobacco, anything that paid. 50 cents a day, sometimes less. And every evening, he came back to the hill. Clearing, cutting. Dragging brush downhill by hand, stacking what he could sell, burning what he couldn't.
The slope changed slowly, too slow for anyone else to notice. But Caleb saw it, every foot gained, every root pulled, every inch of ground opened. By fall, the first section was clear enough to see the shape of the land beneath it. The curve his father had pointed out, the slight flattening near the base, the way the soil held just a little longer after rain. That was when he started cutting terraces. He didn't have the right tools, didn't have a team, didn't have experience, so he did it the only way he knew how, the way he'd been shown. He cut into the slope with a shovel, dragged the dirt outward. Built a narrow ledge, packed it down with his boots. Then moved a few feet over, and did it again. The first terrace collapsed after 2 days of rain, the second held. He learned from that, adjusted the angle, changed the cut, packed it tighter. The third held better, the fourth better than that. By winter, he had carved the line across the hill, not perfect, not straight, but usable. That was enough. He planted the first crop in the spring, not much.
Small strip along the terrace. He didn't expect it to succeed. He just needed to see what the land would do. The plants came in slow, uneven, some died early, some held. But the ones that held stronger than he expected. By midsummer, that strip of land looked different from the rest of the hillside. Greener, thicker, alive in a way the untouched ground wasn't. Caleb stood at the edge of it one evening, hands resting on his hips, looking down at what he had made. It wasn't much, not yet, but it was proof. Proof that his father had been right. Proof that the ground everyone ignored wasn't empty. It just needed someone to work it. Later that year, he found what he'd been looking for. Not in a store, not from a dealer. At a farm auction 30 miles south. An old steel plow, bent, rusted, the blade worn thin. No one wanted it. He bought it for $8. A disc harrow came next. $12. Missing parts, worn bearings. He bought that too. By the time he was done, he had spent $26. Still had some left. He hauled the pieces back home himself, one load at a time. And that winter, he rebuilt them, straightened the blade with heat and hammer, sharpened it on stone until it cut clean again, pulled apart the disc, replaced what he could, improvised what he couldn't. It wasn't new, it wasn't pretty, but it worked. The first time he pulled the plow through his own soil, the blade cut deeper than anything he had done by hand. Cleaner, faster. The ground opened. Caleb stopped at the end of the row, turned, looked back. The line in the soil was straight, solid, real. For the first time, this wasn't just an idea. It was a farm. Not big, not finished, but started. And no one had given it to him. He had built it, from a hill everyone else had walked past. The land didn't change all at once. It never does. The first year, Caleb made just enough to prove he wasn't wrong. The second year, he made enough to keep going. By the third year, people started noticing. Not because it looked impressive, it didn't, not yet. But because it was still there, still working. While other pieces of ground like it had been left alone. He kept expanding. One section at a time, clear a strip, cut a terrace, plant, wait. Repeat. He didn't rush it, couldn't afford to. Every mistake cost time, every correction took longer. But each year, the line moved further across the hill, each year, the ground held a little better. By 1950, he had carved 20 acres out of that slope. 20 acres that no one had wanted. He planted tobacco on the south-facing sections, corn along the lower ground, grass along the ridges. Not because someone told him to, because he had seen how the land behaved.
That first real tobacco crop changed everything. When he sold it, the number didn't feel real. $1,200. More money than his father had ever made in a year. Caleb didn't celebrate, he didn't spend it, he used it, paid off what little he owed, bought more tools, saved the rest. The next year, he did the same. Then again. No loans, no credit, no shortcuts, just work and time. By the time he was 21, the hill didn't look like it used to. The timber was gone, replaced by lines of planted ground, terraces running across the slope like steps carved into the land. A small barn stood near the bottom, built from trees he had cut himself. A house, 2 rooms, tight and solid, sat just above it. Also his. And for the first time in his life, he owned a pair of boots. Not handed down, not borrowed, bought, he didn't wear them all the time, didn't need to. But they were there, proof. That same year, he bought his first machine. Not from a dealership, not from a man like Frank Dalton, from an auction. A farmall tractor, old, worn, barely running. $45. Most men wouldn't have touched it. Caleb brought it home. Parked it in the barn, and spent the winter taking it apart. Piece by piece, bolt by bolt, he didn't know engines, not really. So he learned, from a book he borrowed, from trial and error, from breaking things and fixing them again. There were nights he thought it wouldn't run. Mornings he started over. Days he got nowhere, but he didn't quit. One cold morning near the end of winter, he turned the crank again. The engine coughed. Once, then again, then it caught.
Then it caught. The sound filled the barn, loud, unsteady, alive. Caleb stepped back, watched it run. Didn't move for a moment. Then he climbed onto the seat. By the time Caleb Turner turned 40, people in the county had stopped asking if he would fail. They started asking how he had done it. The land told the answer. Not in one place, everywhere. Hillsides that used to wash out after a hard rain now held. Ridges that had grown nothing but scrub now carried cattle. Bottom ground that had been ignored, now planted and producing. It didn't look like other farms, not clean rows across flat land, not wide, open fields you could run a new machine across without thinking. It looked built. Piece by piece. Every line in the soil had a reason. Every slope had been shaped to hold. Every acre had been chosen, not because it was easy, because no one else wanted it. That was the difference. By the early 1970s, Caleb owned more land than most men who had laughed at him when he started. Not borrowed, not financed, paid for. He didn't talk about it, didn't need to. The numbers spoke, the ground spoke. One afternoon, he drove into town. Same road he had walked barefoot years before. Same storefronts, same feed store, same dealership. He hadn't stepped inside it once since that day, not once. But that day, he stopped. The sign had changed, ownership had changed. But the building was the same. He parked his truck outside, sat there for a moment. Hands resting on the wheel. Then he stepped out. Boots hit the pavement, not new, but his. He walked in. The air felt the same, cool, clean, smelled the same too. Different men behind the counter now, different customers. No one looked twice at him. He didn't stay long, didn't need to. because this wasn't about buying anything. As he stepped back outside, a voice called from across the street. "Caleb?" He turned. Frank Dalton stood near the edge of the road, older now, shoulders lower, face lined in ways it hadn't been before. He walked over slowly, stopped a few feet away. "Haven't seen you in a long time," Frank said. Caleb nodded once. "Been busy." Frank gave a small, uncertain smile. "I've heard." Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, just quiet. "How much land you running now?" Frank asked. "About 400. Frank let that sit. 400 acres. "All paid for?" he asked. Caleb nodded. "Every acre." Frank looked at him, not at the boots, not at the truck, at him. "I remember you," he said. Caleb didn't answer. "You came into my store," Frank continued, "barefoot, holding $60. I remember. I laughed at you." Caleb met his eyes. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah," he said. "You did." Frank nodded slowly, took a breath. "I was wrong." The words stayed there, simple, late, but real. Caleb didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't offer anything back. Because the truth didn't need agreement. It had already been proven. "I sent you away," Frank said. "Told you people like you don't farm for real." He looked down at the road for a moment, then back up. "And you went and built something bigger than most of the men I ever sold to." Caleb shifted his weight slightly, hands relaxed at his sides. "You did me a favor," he said. Frank blinked, didn't expect that. Caleb continued. "You made it clear nobody was going to help me. No one was going to give me anything. And once I knew that," he paused. Looked past Frank, out toward the hills beyond the town. "I stopped waiting." The wind moved lightly across the road. Frank didn't have an answer, not one that mattered. Caleb nodded once, not to end the conversation, to acknowledge it. Then he turned, walked back to his truck. He didn't look back, didn't need to. The past had already been settled. Years later, when people talked about Caleb Turner, they didn't talk about the day he walked into a dealership barefoot. They talked about the land. How he took ground no one wanted and made it produce. How he never borrowed, never chased what everyone else was chasing. How he built something that lasted, but if you asked him, really asked, what mattered most, he wouldn't talk about the acres, or the money, or the machines. He'd talk about the hill, the one everyone else walked past. Because that was where it started. Not with opportunity, not with approval, with a piece of ground nobody wanted, and a decision to work it anyway. And that was all he ever needed.